They shaved her head, thinking they were erasing her identity, but without knowing it, they were preparing the most powerful woman in that courtroom to make history. It was supposed to be just another morning at the Charleston federal courthouse, but that day the air felt heavier, as if the building itself sensed a line was about to be crossed. Celeste Monroe stepped out of her silver Buick and adjusted the collar of her navy blue blazer. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement, steady and composed. She clutched a slim leather portfolio in one hand, and though her judicial robe remained in the car, as always, her authority walked with her. She preferred to enter buildings not as a judge, but as a citizen, observant, poised, quietly watching the world before announcing her presence. That morning, she intended to do the same. But the world had other plans. At the main security checkpoint, the tone changed the moment she approached. Deputy Hank Riker, broad-shouldered, late 50s, with an air of superiority carved into his. Every move narrowed his eyes as she neared. He crossed his thick arms and raised a gloved hand like a traffic stop sign. "Ma'am," he said gruffly, "I'm going to need you to step out of line." Celeste paused. "Is there a problem?" "Officer." He didn't answer right away. His gaze scanned her from head to toe, her silver coils twisted close to her scalp, her pressed slacks, the quiet confidence in her eyes. And that confidence was the problem. She looked like she belonged, and in his world, women like her needed to be reminded that they didn't. "No visible ID," he muttered. "Can't just stroll into a federal building looking like that." Celeste calmly reached into her blazer and produced her federal ID badge. The metallic seal gleamed under. The overhead lights. Riker took it without even glancing at it, slid it into his pocket like it meant nothing. "I'd like that returned," she said, voice steady. "You in a rush, sweetheart?" The word hit like a slap. The younger female guard standing by the scanner shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "I have a courtroom to reach," Celeste replied firmly. "Then you'll follow my procedure," Riker snapped. "And that includes random checks." He didn't wait for her response. He grabbed her upper arm and led her toward a side hallway, away from the line of sight, into a windowless screening room. The room was cold, sterile. One steel chair sat in the center, a scanning table nearby, and, perched ominously on the edge, a set of electric clippers. Celeste's heart thudded once. "I don't consent to this," she said. "You have no legal cause to detain me." "You're acting suspicious," he replied. "That's cause enough." He pointed to the chair. "Sit down." She remained standing. "This is unlawful." Two more officers entered. One grabbed her left wrist, the other her right. Celeste's voice rose with authority. "This is a violation. I demand your names." No one answered. Instead, Riker picked up the clippers. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Standard protocol," he said, gesturing to her scalp. "You could be hiding something in that mop." Celeste tried to rise, but a sharp grip forced her down. The clippers buzzed to life, filling the room with a sound like a swarm of bees. She felt the cold metal press against her scalp. Then a thick, silver coil of hair fell to the floor, and another, and another. Her breath caught in her throat. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't blink. She sat there, robbed of dignity, but not of power, and watched as pieces of her heritage, her history, her pride fell to the tile in silence. One guard chuckled. "She looks better already." "She should have walked in with more respect," Riker added, brushing loose hairs from his sleeve. "Now you look more presentable." Celeste's fists clenched in her lap, knuckles pale. But when she spoke again, her voice was steady as iron. "You'll regret this." Riker smirked and leaned close. "People like you always say that." Then it was over. He opened the door. "You're free to go. Courtroom's that way, Your Honor." He said it with mockery. Celeste rose, took her badge from the table without asking, and walked out. Her steps were even, her face unreadable, But inside her chest burned something deeper than rage, purpose, because what Riker didn't know was this. She wasn't there to observe. She wasn't there as a defendant. She wasn't there to be judged. She was the judge, and she was about to turn that courtroom into a reckoning. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder than it should have been. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Conversations echoed faintly in the distance. But Celeste Monroe walked through it in silence, her shaved scalp exposed to the chill, the rhythm of her heels deliberate, heavy. She passed clerks, interns, lawyers. Some of them looked away. Some stared, their faces knotting with confusion or discomfort. A few looked like they might speak, but no one did. That silence, the kind soaked in guilt and complicity, said more than any words could. She could feel their eyes, not on her badge or her case file, but on her head, on what had been done to her. They didn't know the details, not yet, but they knew something had happened, something wrong. And Celeste, she wasn't hiding it. She didn't fix her hair, didn't reach for a scarf. She let it show. She wanted them to see. The double doors to the courtroom loomed ahead. She paused just before them, inhaled deeply. She didn't enter through the judge's chambers as protocol dictated. She didn't wait for ceremony or escort. Today, ceremony could wait. With one push, she opened both doors. The room went still. Every conversation died. Every eye turned. First, they saw the woman. No robe, no entourage, no pretense. Then they saw her head, the uneven stubble, the raw scalp, the silence carved across her skin. And then realization began to ripple like a silent wave. She wasn't just someone who had been dragged through security. She wasn't just a victim. She was the judge. Celeste walked down the center aisle. Her heels struck the polished floor like a slow drumbeat. Past the gallery, past the prosecution, past the defense, behind. The bench, her chair waited. Her robe lay folded neatly over the armrest. Just as she'd left it, Deputy Hank Riker was still standing at the side door. When their eyes met, he froze. His smirk, the one he'd worn all morning, vanished. Celeste didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She didn't give him the satisfaction of emotion. She stepped behind the bench. Slowly, she unfolded her robe and placed it over her shoulders. She didn't ask for assistance. She didn't wait for the clerk to announce her. She did it herself, one deliberate motion at a time, each movement a reclamation. She adjusted the fabric at her wrists, straightened her posture, then turned to the court clerk. "Is the docket ready?" she asked. The clerk's voice cracked. Yes, Your Honor." Celeste nodded. She sat down. The leather of the judge's chair creaked softly beneath her, the only sound in the room, and for the first time since she'd entered, she let her gaze sweep the courtroom. Plaintiffs, defendants, reporters, interns, all of them were watching now, not just because she was the judge, but because something had shifted. The illusion of power had cracked. The robe didn't define her anymore. She did. "We will begin," she said, "with preliminary testimony on Case 2371F, United States versus Charleston Police Department." The prosecutor stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The first witness is ready." A uniformed officer approached the stand. Officer Lionel Vance, mid-30s, visibly nervous. He was one of the officers involved in a protest incident last year that had left an elderly veteran hospitalized. Celeste didn't look at her notes. She didn't need to. She listened. Carefully, intently. Her fingers tapped lightly against her legal pad. She asked no questions. Not yet. She watched the man on the stand squirm under the weight of the facts, the truth pressing down on his carefully rehearsed answers. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Deputy Riker, shifting, uncomfortably in place near the courtroom exit, fidgeting with the strap of his belt, glancing toward the door like it might offer escape. It wouldn't, because his time was coming. After the first witness stepped down, Celeste called for a short recess. The courtroom began to empty slowly, but the whispers were already circulating. Fast, sharp, cutting. "Did you see her?" "That's the judge? After what they—" She walked in like nothing happened. In the quiet that followed, Celeste remained seated. When most of the gallery had cleared, only her clerk, 2 junior officers, and Riker remained. She turned, her gaze toward him, sharp-focused. "Deputy Riker," she said. He stopped mid-step. His face went pale. "Step forward," he hesitated. "Your Honor, Now." He obeyed. Slow, like a man walking toward a cliff he hadn't seen coming. "State your full name for the record." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard. Me, Hank Riker." She leaned forward. "How long have you worked in this courthouse?" 14 years. She tapped her pen against the desk. "Once? Twice? And in those 14 years, how many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" The question struck like lightning. He stammered. I didn't, Your Honor, I didn't know." "That's not what I asked." He looked around the room. No help came. "How many formal complaints have been filed against you?" I'm not sure." "Let me help you," she said, voice cutting through the air like a blade. 12 formal complaints, all dismissed, all buried, all protected under the guise of protocol." He opened his mouth. Again, but Celeste stood, and her voice shattered the stillness. "You didn't know who I was," she said. "You didn't ask, you didn't care. You saw a black woman in your space and you assumed you could humiliate her, strip her down, laugh. While doing it, her eyes bore into him. And now, Mr. Riker, you will answer to the law." Deputy Hank Riker stood in the center of the courtroom, his hands clasped in front of him, knuckles white. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one giving orders. He wasn't protected by silence or routine or familiarity. He was exposed, and Celeste Monroe wasn't just staring at him. She was aiming. "In your 14 years at this courthouse," she said slowly, "how many formal complaints were filed against you?" Riker shifted. I don't know. Do not lie to this court." He swallowed hard. 12, I think." "You think," she echoed. "Do you need help remembering their content?" Riker opened his mouth, but no words came out. Celeste tapped the tablet in front of her. "I have the records. We'll read them aloud if necessary." The courtroom doors creaked open in the back. People were returning from recess. Staff, lawyers, reporters, and they were quiet. "Complaint number 4, Celeste began, filed by a public defender named Naomi Sanchez. She alleged that during a client intake, you cornered her in a hallway and pressed her against a wall. She reported it. Your supervisor marked it as insufficient evidence. Sound familiar?" Silence. "Complaint number 8, she continued, her tone flat but deliberate. "A 17-year-old intern, anonymous at the time. She stated you asked her to remove her bra during screening. She was told she must have misunderstood protocol. Sound familiar, Deputy?" His mouth moved like he wanted to answer. She didn't. "Wait, 12 complaints, all dismissed, all buried. And now you want this court to believe that what happened to me, to Judge Monroe, was a misunderstanding?" She stood slowly. Her robe shifted across her shoulders like armor. "You knew what you were doing," she said. "You did it on purpose, and you enjoyed it." He looked ready to speak, but she cut him off. "And the worst part, Mr. Riker, is that you believed you'd walk away from it. Like always." The room remained silent, except for the scratch of pens and the occasional flick of a camera shutter. From the press bench, reporters were leaning forward, fingers flying across their devices. "But today," Celeste continued, "you picked the wrong target, and this time the silence doesn't belong to you." She turned toward the 2 officers still stationed near the courtroom doors. "Deputy Riker is now the subject of a formal criminal investigation," she said, voice echoing. "Effective immediately. He is to be taken into custody. Separate. Holding. No general population." The 2 officers didn't hesitate. They stepped forward, cuffs already in hand. Riker stepped back. "Wait," he said. "You can't—" But he didn't finish the sentence, because the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, and in that sound, a new era began. He was escorted out of the courtroom, head down, mouth open in stunned disbelief. For a man who had commanded entire hallways with just his presence, he now looked small, powerless. And yet, the moment wasn't just about him. It was about everything that allowed him to thrive. Celeste sat back down, her hands folded. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. No one was pretending anymore. The rot had been exposed, and it wasn't just Riker. It was the system. She looked toward her clerk. "Resume testimony." The next witness entered. A black man in his 40s, built like someone who had done physical labor his entire life, calloused hands, eyes hollow with loss. "State your name for the court." "Howard Briggs," he said, "warehouse foreman." "Why are you here today, Mr. Briggs?" He paused. "My son, 17 years old. He was attacked during a protest last year." Celeste nodded. She already knew the case. "He survived," Howard continued, "but barely. Officer put a knee on his throat, crushed his windpipe. He hasn't spoken since." A visible wave of discomfort rolled through the room. The defense shifted in their seats. The prosecutor sat forward, listening carefully. "They told me he was resisting," Briggs said. "They told me to calm down, that it wasn't serious." He looked directly at the bench. No one listened. Until now. Celeste leaned forward. Her voice was lower now, not for drama but for clarity. "You've been heard, Mr. Briggs." He nodded, his lips trembling. When he stepped down, the silence he left behind was unbearable, because it wasn't just about his son. It was about the dozens, maybe hundreds, like him. Silenced, ignored, swept aside for the sake of order. Celeste stood once more. "This court is not just reviewing one man's actions," she said. "We are reviewing a culture, one that rewards cruelty, that punishes silence with exile and truth with mockery." She pointed toward the back of the courtroom. "This space, this temple of justice, will no longer be a shelter for predators in uniform." People didn't cheer. They didn't need to, because they understood this was no longer a trial. It was a turning point, and Judge Celeste Monroe wasn't just presiding, she was rewriting the rules. It didn't take long before the courtroom doors had even finished swinging shut behind Deputy Riker's cuffed form. The murmurs started from the gallery, from the defense table, from the courthouse hallways beyond. The system was reacting, wounded, offended, alarmed, not because Riker had been taken away, but because someone had dared to break the pattern. When Celeste returned to the bench after a brief recess, the room was tense, not with confusion, but with calculation. There were new faces among the defense team, suits sharper, ties tighter, jawlines clenched with polished indignation. A man in his late 40s rose from the defense table, pinstripe suit, hair meticulously parted. He spoke with the practiced cadence of someone used to being the loudest voice in the room. "Your Honor," he began, stepping forward, "before we proceed, the defense would like to raise a matter of judicial concern." Celeste didn't move. "Proceed." He clasped his hands together, voice rich and deliberate. "Given the unusual circumstances of this morning, namely the detainment and public confrontation involving Deputy Hank Riker, we believe there is reasonable concern regarding the impartiality of this bench." The room stirred. The gallery tensed. Celeste simply blinked. "You're suggesting that because I was assaulted, I cannot carry out my judicial duties?" The attorney nodded. "We're suggesting that the perception of bias may compromise these proceedings." Celeste let the silence breathe, let it become heavy. Then she stood and walked slowly, deliberately to the edge of the bench. "I was publicly assaulted, humiliated, not because of what I said, not because of how I behaved, but because of who I am." She paused. "Because a man in uniform looked at me, a black woman entering a courthouse, and decided I didn't belong." The attorney opened his mouth, but she continued. And what did I do in response? Her voice sharpened. I took my seat. I conducted this hearing. I followed every rule, every statute, every expectation of this role, even when no one expected me to. She scanned the courtroom. You want to talk about bias? She pointed to the bench. Real bias is 12 ignored complaints buried to protect a man like Riker. Her hand shifted to the gallery. Real bias is a 17-year-old. Black boy left gasping for air during a peaceful protest, and no one held accountable. She stepped closer to the defense table. Real bias is you, standing here, not to defend truth, but to defend a machine that has operated unchecked for decades. The attorney stiffened. Celeste leaned in just slightly. You're not afraid. I'm biased. You're afraid I'm awake. The room fell completely still. She returned to the bench, straightened her robe, and sat down. This court will proceed, she said. If you wish to challenge my authority, you are welcome to file an appeal. I'll provide the paperwork myself. The defense attorney didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. She turned to the prosecution. Call your next witness. The courtroom breathed again. The witness was a surprise, not a victim, not a protester, not an activist, a former courthouse employee, middle-aged, sharp glasses, crisp navy blazer. Her name was Denise Talley. Celeste recognized her, quiet, efficient, worked in records for nearly a decade, never made waves until now. Denise took the stand, was sworn in, sat down. The prosecutor stepped forward. Ms. Talley, during your time at this courthouse, were you made aware of any complaints against Deputy Hank Riker? Denise's jaw tightened. Yes. How many? 12 official, twice that many informal. And what happened to those complaints? Her eyes flicked towards Celeste, then back to the room. They were mishandled, some marked as resolved. When they weren't, some disappeared entirely. Do you know who gave the order to suppress them? A long pause. Then quietly, Judge Terence Mahoney. A ripple moved through the courtroom like an electrical pulse. Judge Mahoney, retired 6 months prior, respected, decorated, Celeste's former mentor. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting, and why would he suppress them? The prosecutor asked. Denise swallowed. Her voice shook, but held. He said that bringing them forward would undermine public trust, that it would make the courthouse look weak. Celeste remained motionless, because that phrase, that exact lie, was one she had heard before. Justice delayed to preserve appearance, abuse tolerated in the name of decorum, order maintained by silence. The court clerk fidgeted. Reporters typed furiously. A woman in the back of the gallery wiped her eyes. Denise looked down, then back up. I watched men like Riker walk these halls untouched. I watched interns searched, witnesses intimidated, and I said nothing for too long, but not anymore. Celeste leaned forward. It wasn't just a testimony, it was an indictment of the system, of herself, of everyone who had known and done nothing. The defense attorney didn't rise again, because what could he say? That the silence had been justified, that the lies were policy, that the victims had imagined it. Celeste called a recess. When she stood, she glanced at the gallery, and what she saw wasn't fear anymore. It was something else, respect, recognition, and the beginning of something bigger than any verdict. A reckoning was unfolding, not behind closed doors, but in front of the entire nation. The rain started just before dawn, not a gentle drizzle, not a cleansing storm, a downpour. The kind that washes away dust, but also memory. It slammed against the courthouse windows like a warning. Nothing would be the same again. Inside, the marble floors glistened under damp shoes. Reporters huddled under awnings. Staff moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. But in Judge Celeste Monroe's chambers, the world was still. She stood by the window, watching the storm pound the city she had served, and survived. The folder in her hands was thick, marked confidential. Inside, Every complaint filed against Hank Riker, 12 formal, many more missing, all signed, reviewed, and dismissed by names she knew: Mahoney, Alston, Chambers, supervising judges, chiefs of security, assistant prosecutors. It was worse than she had feared. Not just a few blind eyes, a machine, and then a single email, dated 5 years ago, from Mahoney to the head of courthouse security. Riker may be rough around the edges, but he keeps the building in line, especially with certain groups. Best to let things be. Her fingers curled around the page until it crumpled. There it was, the rot written out plainly. A knock interrupted her rage. Her clerk stepped in, hesitant. "Your Honor, someone from the DOJ is here. They say it's urgent." Celeste turned. "Send them in." A man in a grey suit stepped inside. No umbrella, no briefcase. Just calm eyes and a sealed envelope. "Judge Monroe," he said. "Office of Civil Rights. I was dispatched the moment footage of the incident went public." Celeste didn't flinch. "Fast response," the man nodded. "We're opening a formal federal investigation into the Charleston District Courthouse. All previous complaints, all suppression of evidence, and every supervisor tied to the mishandling." She said nothing, just nodded once. He handed over the envelope. "And one more thing," he added. "The footage, it's gone viral. Senate staffers are already requesting transcripts. Even a few presidential candidates have issued statements." Celeste didn't move. "I didn't do it for them," she said. He smiled. "No, that's why it matters." When he left, she turned back to the window. Outside, the rain hadn't stopped, but neither had the truth. She entered the courtroom 20 minutes later, and it was full again. But now, it wasn't just the usual audience. Rows of local residents lined the gallery. Protesters had come inside to sit quietly, respectfully. Even a group of elderly women in church hats sat solemnly near the front. Some of them had filed complaints. Some had been brushed aside decades earlier. Now they came not for justice, but for recognition. Celeste took the bench, and the room rose. No gavels, no ceremony, just reverence. As she sat, a man near the doorway raised his hand. He looked to be in his 60s. Clean shirt, nervous hands. "Your Honor," he said gently. "May I speak?" A pause, then a nod. He stepped forward. "My name is Louis Bryant. I was arrested in this courthouse in 2011 by Deputy Riker. I raised my voice when my daughter's case was dismissed." He paused. "He slammed me into a wall, broke 2 ribs. They told me I tripped. That's what the report said." He glanced around the room. "I never came back. I never filed anything else. I thought it wouldn't matter." Celeste met his eyes. "It matters now." She stood. "Is there anyone else here who was harmed by Deputy Riker, or by this system, and was never heard?" Silence. Then a hand. Then another, and another. 5, 10, 15. Dozens. Every hand was a story. Every story had been silenced. Until now. Celeste didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just stood and bore witness. One by one they spoke. A young man who'd been strip-searched in front of his younger brother. A woman whose daughter had been pulled from line and questioned for wearing a headscarf. A former intern who had been asked to change clothes before entering, and not one of their complaints had ever made it past the front desk. By the time the last hand lowered, the courtroom had transformed. No longer a place for performance, but a cathedral of memory, of truth. And somewhere, far away, in a concrete room with flickering lights, Hank Riker sat, in cuffs, alone, watching it unfold on a grainy, wall-mounted television. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak, because what he was seeing wasn't vengeance. It was justice, and it was irreversible. The final day of the hearing began with thunder, not from the sky, though the rain still fell in cold, steady sheets, but from inside, from the echo of voices that had risen and refused to quiet, from a truth that had outgrown the walls built to contain it. Charleston had changed, and the country was watching. The courtroom was packed to capacity, and beyond. Law students sat on the floor, Civil rights lawyers lined the walls. Journalists balanced laptops on their knees. Camera crews angled lenses between shoulders and wooden beams. Outside, people filled the streets, not just to protest, but to witness, because this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a reckoning. Celeste Monroe entered the courtroom, not in silence, but to a respectful hush, not one of fear or hesitation, but reverence. She paused before the bench. Then, slowly, she took off her robe, folded it neatly, laid it over her chair, and stood, not as Judge Monroe, not as a title, but as a woman, a survivor, a witness, a leader. She looked out over the room. "I've sat behind this bench for years," she said, her voice calm but unshakable. "I've delivered rulings, followed procedure, carried the weight of justice on my shoulders. But I've also stayed silent when I should have spoken." She took a step forward. "And today, I'm done being quiet." No one moved. No one breathed. She turned toward the courtroom doors. "Bring in the defendant." The officers opened the side door. Hank Riker entered, wrists bound in front of him, escorted by 2 U.S. Marshals. No uniform, no badge, just a gray jumpsuit and hollow eyes. He looked smaller now. He stood beside his public defender, glancing once toward Celeste, then looking away. She didn't flinch. "This court finds Deputy Hank Riker guilty of abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and official misconduct," she said. "You are sentenced to the maximum allowable penalties under federal law." She let the words hang. 6 years imprisonment for abuse of power, 5 years for civil rights violations, 1 year for obstruction of justice. A pause. "But that's the legal part." Riker looked up, confused. Celeste's voice dropped. "Now comes the human part." The room held its breath. "You spent your career deciding who was worthy of dignity and who wasn't. You believed the badge made you immune. That silence would protect you, that people like me would never hold the gavel." Her gaze sharpened. "Well, now you get to sit in the seat you made for others." She nodded to the marshals. "Take him away." As Riker was led out, no one clapped, no one cheered, because it wasn't about celebration, it was about closure, about bearing witness, and knowing it would never be the same again. Celeste turned back to the courtroom. She reached beneath the desk and lifted a folder. "This," she said, "is a policy proposal." She held it high. "It is called the Monroe Mandate." A ripple moved through the room. "It requires all bailiffs, court officers, and courthouse personnel in this district to undergo comprehensive anti-bias training, psychological screening, routine evaluations, and strict disciplinary oversight." She set it down. "This court is no longer interested in protecting institutions at the expense of individuals. We are no longer pretending that silence is neutrality." She looked toward the gallery. "Every signature in the complaints I reviewed represented a choice, not a mistake. A choice to ignore victims, to protect predators, to maintain an illusion of order built on fear." She turned to the defense attorneys, the press, the public. "And it ends today." There was no applause, only stunned silence. Then a slow rise. One by one people stood, not because they were told to, but because they understood. This is what history looks like. Later that evening, Celeste sat alone in her chambers. The robe hung neatly behind her. The folder rested on her desk. Her scalp, once raw, had begun to grow back, uneven coils, stubborn silver. Beautiful. There was a knock. The door opened. Her sister, Nen, stepped in with a folding stool and a quiet smile. She plugged in a small pair of clippers. "You ready?" she asked. Celeste met her eyes in the mirror. There was no fear anymore, just clarity. "Yes," she said softly. "Let's finish it." Nien moved carefully, gently, each pass of the clippers deliberate. Not an act of violence, an act of choice, of rebirth. When she was done, she handed Celeste a mirror. Celeste turned it over slowly, looked at her reflection. Bald, bare, bold, and free. "You could rock that every damn day and still own every room you walk into," Nayan said. Celeste didn't. Smile right away. She just stared. "This is who I am now," she whispered. Nen leaned in. "No," she said. "This is who you've always been. Now the world just caught up." That night Celeste walked out of the courthouse. No scarf, no wig, no armor, just her head, held high under the Charleston streetlights. A small group of onlookers spotted her. An elderly woman stepped forward, brown skin, thick glasses, trembling hands. "I never thought I'd live to see someone like you do what you just did," she said. Celeste took her hand. "You did more than survive," she replied. "You paved the road." Behind them, a teenage girl removed her hoodie. Her own shaved head caught the light. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Celeste nodded once. A silent inheritance passed between them. Justice, at last, had a face. And it wasn't perfect. It was powerful.